When Jasmine Crockett spoke on live television, it wasn't the heat of passion or some tabloid-style agenda driving her words. It was calculated, deliberate, and coldly precise. Sitting across from a panel discussing corruption and dynastic power, she had spent most of the segment engaging in measured critiques of public officials and the misuse of authority. But as the conversation started touching on familial influence in presidential politics, Crockett changed gears. She paused, leaned forward just slightly, and dropped a line that sent shockwaves across the media landscape. Without raising her voice or changing her tone, she asked a question that had long been whispered in corners of political and journalistic circles but never addressed openly on such a large platform. Why are we pretending not to see how Ivanka Trump's role blurred far more than political lines? And why have we all ignored the whispers about the nature of her relationship with her father, Donald Trump? The moment was chilling in its quiet intensity. The room froze. Hosts and other guests fumbled for composure, visibly stunned. Crockett didn't embellish. She didn't rant. She simply let the implication hang, knowing full well the fire she'd just lit. Her statement wasn't framed as a personal attack. It was positioned as a necessary confrontation with the truth, one tied directly to the conversation about corruption and compromised judgment at the highest levels of power. What made Crockett's words hit so hard wasn't just their content, it was the context. She framed the allegation not as scandalous gossip, but as a legitimate ethical concern. In her eyes, if Ivanka Trump held significant sway in policy decisions, took meetings behind closed doors, and operated as both daughter and advisor to Donald Trump during his presidency, then the public deserved to know whether that relationship crossed lines that affect national integrity. If emotional manipulation or inappropriate influence played any part in shaping American policy, that wasn't just a private matter, that was a breach of democratic function. And the more one looked at the records, the more the cracks appeared. Ivanka wasn't a ceremonial figure. She had access to classified information. She traveled on behalf of the administration. She held a formal title but operated often informally, engaging in areas from foreign relations to domestic economic strategies. Donald Trump consistently praised her publicly in ways that, at times, made even his supporters squirm. From his infamous, "If she weren't my daughter," comments to the overly affectionate behavior captured in photographs. The optics were, at best, uncomfortably and at worst, deeply inappropriate. Crockett didn't invent this narrative. She resurrected it. She voiced what others had been too afraid or too cautious to say outright. And in doing so, she reframed the issue entirely not as a scandalous distraction, but as a matter of national concern. If a president's daughter is wielding executive power, while possibly engaged in a relationship defined by emotional or psychological control or something worse, that's not just uncomfortable, that's destabilizing. Even more revealing was the absence of rebuttal from Donald Trump himself. He, who famously reacts to every slight, real or imagined, with scathing posts and all-caps responses, remained silent. No Truth Social post, no raging press release, no denial. The silence was deafening and only served to make Crockett's words echo louder. People began looking back. Journalists and insiders who'd once dismissed the rumors as too explosive or unprovable began to reconsider. Former staffers recalled Ivanka's unusually close access, her ability to override advisors, her presence in sensitive meetings where her role wasn't clear. Some mentioned how staff would avoid commenting on her proximity to Trump, afraid of the reaction it might provoke. And while no one offered concrete proof of anything physical, the behavioral patterns raised serious questions. That was exactly Crockett's point. It wasn't just about whether something happened behind closed doors. It was about the cumulative weight of inappropriate closeness, of nepotism left unchecked, of a president allowing his daughter to be placed in positions of immense responsibility, without proper oversight and potentially, for reasons beyond professionalism. Her question was, where does family end and governance begin? And when those lines blur, what do we risk losing? Her statement didn't rely on theatrics or dramatics. It was factual, framed as a demand for transparency and accountability in a democracy that claims to separate personal interests from the public good. And in putting Donald Trump and Ivanka at the center of that demand, Jasmine Crockett reminded the nation of something many had chosen to forget: power, when insulated by family ties and shielded from scrutiny, can corrupt in ways far more disturbing than money ever could. The moment Ivanka Trump went live on Instagram, it became clear something had cracked. She wasn't reading from a statement. She wasn't seated in her usual polished environment, framed by curated lighting and luxury decor. This wasn't the poised, tightly controlled daughter of a former president. It was someone unraveling, in real time, emotionally raw, visibly shaken, and angry in a way the public had never seen before. This all came on the heels of Jasmine Crockett's on-air comments that questioned the nature of Ivanka's relationship with her father, Donald Trump. Crockett hadn't shouted. She didn't accuse in tabloid terms. She asked a question, quiet and unnerving, about blurred boundaries and inappropriate influence. but the effect it had on Ivanka was explosive. Ivanka's reaction was not what anyone expected from someone with years of media training and public image control. Rather than issuing a press release through legal representatives or declining to comment, she opened up her phone camera, hit go live, and started ranting in front of tens of thousands of viewers. "This is sick," she began. "How dare she imply such a thing? It's disgusting. She doesn't know me. She doesn't know my father." The intensity of her outburst caught everyone off guard. Viewers expected a denial. What they got was deflection and fury. Ivanka kept circling around the accusation without ever addressing it directly. She didn't say, "That's absolutely untrue." She didn't correct the record with clarity. Instead, she focused on being personally insulted, deeply hurt, and victimized. Her tone was high-pitched and defensive, as if someone had touched a nerve too deep to ignore. Political observers immediately noticed the strange framing. Why didn't she just dismiss the accusation outright? Why did she seem more upset about being attacked than she was interested in disproving the actual content of the claim? Her lack of a firm denial became the story. It wasn't what she said, it was what she didn't say. And in that silence, speculation grew even louder. This was not the first time Ivanka and Donald Trump's relationship had made people uncomfortable. Over the years, Trump himself had made numerous off-color remarks, publicly commenting on his daughter's looks, suggesting on national TV that if she weren't his daughter, he might date her, and appearing overly touchy in photo ops. At the time, many dismissed these as Trump being Trump, unfiltered and tone deaf. But when viewed through the lens of Crockett's comments and Ivanka's breakdown, they took on a new meaning. Ivanka's emotional unraveling gave the public a rare window into how tightly she had worked to control the narrative about herself. For years, she had walked the line between political power and personal branding. Between being a senior advisor and a fashion mogul, she presented herself as calm, composed, above the chaos of her father's political persona. But Crockett's exposure shattered that facade in seconds. The mere suggestion of inappropriate closeness unglued her. It was as if her entire public identity, dutiful daughter, polished professional, was suddenly up for re-examination. The timing made it worse. Donald Trump was already battling a flood of legal challenges, ethics investigations, and public skepticism. The idea that his daughter could be at the center of another brewing scandal, this time emotional or moral, only added to the fatigue surrounding the Trump brand. And his silence about Ivanka's live video only deepened suspicions. Not a single word defending her. No denial, no fatherly assurance. Just the same strategic retreat he often made when things got too complicated to spin. Psychologists and PR analysts weighed in. Some speculated that Ivanka's reaction wasn't just about defending herself. It was a psychological response to being forced to confront something she had worked hard to bury or ignore. Others saw it as a carefully unplanned moment of truth, where the pressure of years of secrecy burst open in front of a live audience. For her critics, Ivanka's meltdown was the first honest glimpse of what may have really been going on behind the walls of the Trump White House. The tears, the anger, the loss of composure. It wasn't just the behavior of someone wrongfully accused. It looked more like the unraveling of someone who feared that years of carefully managed silence had finally caught up with her. And once that moment went viral, there was no putting it back in the box. In a political environment where media appearances are choreographed down to the lighting angle, Ivanka Trump's unscripted emotional response spoke louder than any press statement ever could. It left a nation wondering not just what had happened but what it really meant when someone so close to the seat of power reacted with such visible panic to a single question. One of the most unsettling aspects of the entire scandal wasn't Jasmine Crockett's bold accusation, or even Ivanka Trump's visibly shaken response. It was the eerie silence that followed from Donald Trump himself. For a man known to attack anything and anyone who so much as scratches his image, his refusal to respond became the loudest part of the entire ordeal. Donald Trump, throughout his career in politics and business, has never shied away from confrontation. From early morning truth social rants, to aggressive press releases, and even courtroom drama, Trump thrives on public conflict. He has insulted presidents, judges, journalists, war heroes, and even children of political opponents. So when Crockett insinuated something deeply personal, something scandalous about his relationship with his own daughter, the public braced for a response. And then, nothing. In the first 24 hours, many assumed Trump was preparing a scorched earth statement, something along the lines of his usual playbook: discredit the speaker, deny the claims, and spin the narrative in his favor. But 48 hours passed, then 72, and not a single word. No tweet, no press release, no public appearance addressing what had quickly become one of the most talked about stories on every major outlet. The silence was chilling. It wasn't just political opponents who noticed. Supporters began to ask questions in online forums. Trump loyalists on conservative media cautiously tried to pivot conversations away from Crockett's accusation, awkwardly dancing around it as if hoping it would disappear. but the absence of Trump's voice only made the story gain momentum. Why would a man who once went ballistic over a comedy sketch suddenly have nothing to say when his own daughter's integrity and his own reputation was being openly questioned? Asterisk. The most plausible answer was unsettling, because Crockett might have hit a nerve he couldn't afford to touch. She hadn't made a wild accusation. She'd posed a deeply uncomfortable question about the boundaries between Ivanka's public role and her private relationship with her father, and that was the trap Trump couldn't escape. To respond too aggressively would mean drawing more attention to it. To deny it too strongly might raise suspicion. So instead, he chose silence, a choice that, in Trump's world, was as abnormal as it was revealing. Asterisk. Journalists began to dig into the timeline of Ivanka's involvement in Trump's administration. There were late-night meetings, private phone calls, moments when other senior advisors were pushed aside in favor of Ivanka's input. The official justification was always the same: trust, loyalty, and intelligence. But under Crockett's lens, these justifications took on a different tone. Was Ivanka simply the most trusted advisor, or was there something deeper, more personal, and possibly manipulative about her role in Trump's White House? Asterisk. Photos from the past started resurfacing. Trump touching her waist during public events, his gaze lingering longer than seemed appropriate. The infamous interview where he commented on her looks, saying, "If Ivanka weren't my daughter, perhaps I'd be dating her." At the time, it had been brushed off as just another tasteless Trump joke. But with new context, it felt different. It felt calculated. And most disturbingly, it felt real. Asterisk. For years, those moments had been dismissed by defenders as misunderstood humor or awkward missteps. But Crockett's remarks gave those interactions new meaning. And Trump's silence, his total refusal to even defend himself, poured gasoline on a fire that was already raging across media platforms. Was he avoiding the topic out of guilt, shame, or fear of what would come next? Asterisk. Even his usual allies on cable news seemed unsure how to proceed. Without Trump's voice guiding the narrative, they were left with nothing but speculation and uncomfortable footage to fill the air. Didn't even offer the usual deflection of blaming fake news. He simply let it sit. And the longer it sat, the more people began to believe there was something to hide. Asterisk. Crockett's strategy, whether intentional or not, had exposed a blind spot in Trump's armor. For all his bombast and aggression, there were still certain subjects he dared not address, and that silence spoke to a man who, for all his bravado, may have known that some accusations couldn't be wiped away with a catchphrase or a legal threat. Asterisk. This was not just about scandal. It was about control. Trump had always controlled the conversation until now. Crockett had forced a pause. And in that pause, the country witnessed something rare. A man who always had something to say suddenly rendered speechless, with only his daughter's unraveling left to do the talking. The chaos ignited by Jasmine Crockett's pointed remarks about Ivanka Trump's relationship with her father didn't just stir a personal scandal, it blew open a deeper, more troubling issue that has quietly simmered beneath American politics for years. The dangers of nepotism and the collapse of boundaries between personal power and public office. Her brief cutting statement didn't simply call attention to salacious rumors. It forced the public to ask whether we have allowed political dynasties to blur ethical lines beyond recognition. And at the center of it all stood Donald Trump, a man who built his administration like a family business where loyalty often mattered more than legality, and blood ties seemed to outrank qualifications. Asterisk. When Donald Trump brought Ivanka into the White House as an official advisor, many saw it as unconventional but not entirely surprising. After all, Trump had always surrounded himself with family. From his real estate empire to his reality TV career, the Trump brand was inseparable from his children. But what happened inside the White House was not simply about image, it became about influence. Ivanka held a formal title, sat in on key international meetings, and handled policy discussions typically reserved for seasoned officials. She was granted a security clearance, traveled as part of diplomatic delegations, and helped shape real decisions on behalf of the United States. And all of this happened without the standard vetting, without public accountability, and without any clear boundaries between her duties as a presidential advisor and her personal relationship with her father. Asterisk. Jasmine Crockett's question posed in a matter-of-fact tone forced the nation to confront what many had conveniently ignored. It wasn't about scandal alone. It was about the structural risk of allowing family members to operate within the machinery of government without sufficient oversight. Her implication about an inappropriate dynamic between Ivanka and Donald Trump highlighted something much broader. When private loyalty overtakes public responsibility, democracy suffers. When a president appoints his daughter, not because she's the most qualified, but because he trusts her personally, that's not governance, that's monarchy in disguise. Asterisk. It wasn't just Ivanka, of course. Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, held an enormous portfolio of responsibilities: Middle East peace, COVID-19 response, criminal justice reform, and more. His qualifications were questionable, his authority was vague, but he had access, and that access came through family ties, not electoral legitimacy. The White House during Trump's administration often resembled a family-run operation. with decisions influenced behind closed doors by individuals who owed their position not to voters or the Constitution, but to the name Trump. Remarks pierced through that fog of normalized nepotism. Her question reminded people that Ivanka wasn't just another political figure, she was someone whose closeness to the president made her nearly untouchable. That protection created a dangerous vacuum of accountability, where no one could challenge her decisions or question her presence. And when her father, Donald Trump, consistently spoke of her in ways that were deeply personal, sometimes disturbingly so, added to the perception that her role was not merely political, but emotional, and possibly manipulative. This toxic blend of power and family created an environment ripe for secrecy and blurred lines. Decisions were made by people shielded from criticism. Mistakes went unpunished. And above all, the American public had no way of knowing who was truly pulling the strings. Was Ivanka speaking for the administration, or was she speaking for her father? Was she guiding policy, or simply echoing his impulses, protected by the intimacy of their relationship? Donald Trump's silence in the aftermath of Crockett's remarks only deepened these questions. If there was nothing to hide, why not set the record straight? Why let the public dwell in uncertainty? His refusal to separate himself from the power he gave his daughter, and now his refusal to even comment on the serious implications of their dynamic, spoke to an arrogance that saw no need for transparency. It was as if, in his mind, he didn't know the public an explanation because power, once inherited or built through loyalty, doesn't ask permission. Crockett didn't have to spell it out in explicit detail. She only had to lift the curtain slightly, and once she did, it was impossible to ignore the patterns. Ivanka's unprecedented access, Trump's disturbing compliments, the silence surrounding their interactions, and the decision-making that bypassed traditional checks. All of it pointed to a government model that blurred the line between personal preference and public duty. By putting Ivanka and Donald Trump's relationship into public scrutiny, Crockett didn't just challenge a family. She challenged a system that allowed them to operate without constraint. Her question served as a warning. When power becomes a family heirloom, when intimacy overrides ethics, and when silence replaces accountability, democracy doesn't just suffer, it corrodes from the inside. As the dust began to settle around Jasmine Crockett's televised revelation, one thing became crystal clear. This wasn't just a fleeting media scandal. It was a profound reckoning with the deeper cracks in American political culture, particularly around power, privilege, and the unchecked influence of family within the halls of government. For years, the Trump brand thrived on a cultivated image of loyalty, family unity, and unfiltered bravado. But Crockett's.com/strategic question shattered that illusion and exposed something far more unsettling: a pattern of blurred lines, compromised roles, and a dangerous normalization of nepotism wrapped in glossy PR. What made the impact of Crockett's words so powerful wasn't sensationalism, was how disturbingly plausible they felt. She didn't try to prove anything conclusively. She didn't wave around documents or claim to have secret tapes. All she did was force the public to look again at what had always been hiding in plain sight. The late-night meetings, the strange body language, the offhand sexualized comments from Donald Trump about his own daughter, the constant elevation of Ivanka into spaces where she arguably had no business being, all of it painted a picture that could no longer be explained away as simply eccentric behavior or Trump being Trump. Ivanka's meltdown only strengthened the case. Her inability to calmly deny the implications and her uncharacteristic emotional spiral showed just how close to the nerve Crockett had struck. It wasn't just about defending her reputation, it was about trying to preserve the image that she and her father had worked so hard to build. The loyal daughter, the brilliant advisor, the face of reason in an otherwise chaotic administration. But as her carefully managed composure crumbled on a live Instagram feed, viewers were left asking not just what happened, but what else had been hidden beneath the surface. Even more revealing was Donald Trump's choice to remain silent. For a man who can't resist firing back at late-night hosts, political rivals, or journalists, his refusal to even acknowledge the scandal hinted at something far more serious. Silence, in this case, was not strength, it was fear, or guilt, or both. Either way, it betrayed the very core of the Trump persona: control. And once that control slipped, once someone like Crockett dared to speak the unspoken, it became impossible to put the story back in the vault. Ultimately, this wasn't just a personal controversy. It was a public reckoning. Jasmine Crockett's question opened the door to a larger discussion about the dangers of dynastic politics, of blurring personal loyalty with professional power, and of what can happen when the people closest to a president become the least accountable. In lifting that veil, she didn't just rattle a political dynasty. She reminded the nation that no one, no matter how powerful or protected, is above